During 2017, I participated in an innovative rehabilitation program for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I came away with an unintended, remarkable body of painting works and greatly improved quality of life. My background as an artist, creative arts therapist and medical scientist enabled me to invite my treating practitioners and colleagues to come together in fostering education and conversation about the Sensitised Central Nervous System and my recovery. Here is one of several offerings.
Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Hassanah Briedis.
Just Hassanah.
Or just Hassanah. Hassanah has a rich and varied professional life. Hassanah has worked with survivors of childhood trauma and abuse. She's a psychotherapist in private practice. She's an artist, she's a singer, she's a poet. She's a university graduate with a PhD from Monash University. She also asked me not to say too much. But Hassanah has worked at the Victoria Clinic, the DAC Centre at the University of Melbourne, and runs a private practice specialising in complex post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder. So thank you, Hassanah. Over to you, and hopefully we can navigate the narrow spaces.
The talk that I'm giving is Victoria's story. It's not my story. So most of this is read out because there's a lot of information to get through in a short time. And wherever possible, I've used Victoria's own words for the descriptions of both experience and the paintings. What we noticed was that her works over that period of about 10 months seem to fall into 4 stages, 4 phases. So I'm presenting it to you as 4 different phases of the process of healing and rehab. And each of those phases will be looked at in terms of the characteristics of that phase, the paintings themselves, of which I'll pick about 2 for each phase, and finally how that phase fits in to the wider context of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and how the rehabilitation seems to have helped the symptoms of PTSD. So the first phase, distraction from pain, focus on just relaxing the nervous system. Victoria's title for this first phase is Colour Shapes. In her own words, the very mechanical nature of colouring by numbers gives me a focal point to practice basic containment of self, distraction from pain, and soothing regulation of my overstimulated nervous system. When she came to designing her own colour by number template, she settled on a single intersecting line that weaves around to form the compartments, which she can then number randomly and assign colours to. Although somewhat messy, using paint allows for smoother strokes, which is less painful for her. Up until now, her artistic work has been contemporary craft, 3D installations, digital collage, not painting. She says, mixing the paint slows the process down, which is good for my agitation and anxiety. It's an enjoyable, soothing feeling, the viscosity of the paint, the colours slowly blending and transforming. It provides a new level of interest and engagement, but is still very contained, like snippets of meditation. Drawing the continuous line is also comforting. One long continuous line that wanders over the page back and forth. The continuous nature feels good, some continuity in my scattered, fragmented, agitated existence. So the two first paintings on your sheet we refer to as Birthday Banksia Palette 1 and 2, which is this one and this one. Her first attempt at expanding this very controlled method is to allow a variation in tones of the numbered colours, which you can see in these paintings. On her birthday, Victoria is given a bunch of native flowers. She creates a colour by numbers painting based on the palette of these flowers. It's the first time a known object is referenced in her paintings. She says, "The viscosity of paint, like laying paint strokes through my mind to soothe the static. The colours are like a cooling, calming bath for my brain and mind." After the first painting, which is this one, Victoria is motivated to try and create a colorscape that will act as a soothing tool with softer, more muted and natural colours to help soften her body and nerves. After creating this, she puts it on her bedroom wall and enjoys dwelling on it. Now, the relationship to PTSD symptoms. Her self-description of her condition when she started painting is, "My nervous system dominated my existence. I was wound up like a spinning top with no relief and no control. I was so tight, yet was also out of control." I found that really interesting because without deliberately doing it, Victoria has named one of the core constructions of PTSD, which is the combination of chaos and rigidity. And this will always be seen in PTSD and complex PTSD. In Victoria's case, the expression of the disorder had a very physiological, we say somatic component. But for many survivors of trauma, this expression of chaos and rigidity may be much harder to spot, disguised as apparently normal behaviour. So an example would be retreating into the home and avoiding socialising, which is the rigidity, combined with intense emotional outbursts, which is the chaos. Another example is internal chaos might be disturbed sleep patterns and extreme anxiety, with rigidity in the form of complete avoidance of facing the traumatic memory that's causing this chaos. Victoria's independent description, without having read this, her independent description, or it might have been after you read it, I'm not sure, of this PTSD reality is here. It would seem to me somatisation, primarily as chronic pain over 20 years, has operated to give permission for me to lead a somewhat reclusive existence. Lots of time alone and time to process has enabled me to continue to appear functional. My occasional outbursts have been kept in check with psychotherapy and private outpourings. So we get that duality of rigidity and chaos. The therapeutic effects that we can notice in this first phase, which in a sense I've already mentioned, reduction of anxiety and agitation, softening of wound up body sensation, and a subtle introduction of a sense of continuity, lessening of fragmentation, a general experience of being soothed. She's noticing that she's sitting for longer periods and there's an improvement in her mental and physical discomfort. Creating something is feeling good, apart from all the good work that Paul was doing. So second phase, extending the process further, departure from circular shapes. The nature of this second phase, it's still very early on in the rehab with Paul. Victoria feels her condition is stabilising a little. She still enjoys the simplicity of the method of colour by numbers, but needs to find a balance between simplicity and creative variation, the artist in her. So decides to try different shapes. In her words, problem-solving exercises push my brain beyond basic survival thinking. I find myself motivated to challenge the art-making process more than any other aspect of my life. It feels strange, disheartening and perplexing to have lost the confidence to do basic physical and mental activities. But I notice I feel emotionally contained and held when painting. It's creative, but orderly and structured. So the two paintings, which are a bit too far down to see, but you've got on your book there, the next two ones, the crescent moon shapes. So Victoria, a bit later, not when she was actually making it, but later, offers some free associative words. Little boats afloat, when turned upside down, wings, uplift, support, flight. Flight feels freeing, floating, buoyant, resilient, surviving. She writes, a general sense of new beginnings. She emphasises that she didn't title these works. They just existed as entities of shape and colour. But the descriptive words felt like remote associations, a touch of whimsy, which are Victoria's words. The second painting, the fourth one on your sheet, is very much in the same frame of a different shape. But she started to use a roller to apply background colour. However, it altered the colour on top. So she tries different solutions to the problem and ends up just making the backgrounds lighter. But the process of problem solving itself gradually strengthens her both physically and mentally. In this phase, the relationship to complex PTSD symptoms, and I just give a very brief word, complex PTSD, which you have on your sheets. Victoria's trauma experiences spanned a period of years during her childhood and adolescence, exposed to the perpetrator from the age of 6 to 26. Long-term abuse and trauma during childhood gives rise to a more complex form of PTSD, which is described in your handout. So the therapeutic developments during phase 2 were changing the avoidance patterns, the rigidity, and managing anxiety patterns, which is the chaos. Victoria says about avoidance, I had always been in a hurry with a sense of urgency when being creative. Now I allow myself to be restrained, to slow down and be more patient. This is unfamiliar but feels healthy. Managing the anxiety patterns, she writes, I find the painting is an anchor during bouts of extreme anxiety. I'm learning to step back from my symptoms and see them as neurologically based, i.e. a result of a dysregulated nervous system. Focusing on the painting means I focus less on the anxiety that's being triggered by my traumatized memory system, and the anxiety episodes don't last as long. Another development, changing patterns of dissociation. Painting gives Victoria practice in staying grounded, staying present. She's challenging the chronic fight or flight response, learning that there are skills and tools she can use to regulate her own nervous system. And finally, in this section, the developing of self-esteem and self-love. Victoria, in her own words, says, I find that I need additional strategies beyond painting to change my pattern of self-blame for my childhood experiences and consequent lack of self-love. So I set in place a particular and new practice of self-affirmation and positive thinking. Looking in the mirror, I make eye contact with myself, repeat my positive affirmations, and most importantly, I smile at myself. Throughout my healing journey, I've used a wide range of interventions and healing tools. But the act of smiling at myself in the mirror is probably the most powerful of all. It's difficult to put words to it, but it was big for me. I think this last comment by Victoria is very significant in terms of healing from trauma. Research and personal experience have shown that very clearly that from a neurological point of view, action at the physical level is required to make real changes in the brain. Certainly thinking about things and making connections, which happens a lot in psychotherapy, do make changes, but the big and permanent changes take place when thinking is combined with physical action. And I'm not talking about exercise. Feeling emotion is a physical action because we don't feel emotion in our brains, we feel it in our body. Writing something down is physical. Picking up the phone to ring someone you've avoided is physical. Leaving the house and engaging in worldly activities, being with other humans, these are all doing words. Victoria's self-description of this stage of the rehab process makes many references to her conscious decision to do the rehab exercises, as Paul was saying, no matter what. There is a strong element of choice, and choice is another key word in any healing from abuse which has robbed you of choice and power. For Victoria, the action of smiling had a huge impact on her brain. For her, it involved the willingness and intention to do something that was self-loving and positive, and I can't emphasise strongly enough how important that was. So the third phase, extending the process out into society. Victoria calls this phase colour vessels, which is probably on your list there.
Yep.
In her words, the metaphor is a powerful one, suggesting the compartments have evolved into vessels. Vessels generally have an opening that allows for movement. This opened container allowed me to breathe more freely, yet still feel safe and held and cohesive. So the nature of this third phase is getting a bit more complex, which is good. Sharing on social media, growing emotional response to the paintings felt in the body, sharing the paintings with Paul, expanding to a slightly larger canvas, allowing bigger, looser brush strokes, imagining the possibility of exhibiting the collection, and expanding to incorporate other artistic styles. Victoria says about sharing with others. Other people begin to notice the paintings and comment on them. People offer interpretations, finding imagery and associations. I enjoy the experience of others engaging with my creations, and the artist in me feels validated. This encourages me to keep painting. I start posting images on Instagram. People's responses are positive, offering descriptive words that elicit a feeling response in my system. And I realise that I'm gradually learning to feel emotions safely without it dysregulating my system. I'm also learning to relax with the artistic process and just enjoy it. Then the emotional response, expressing emotion through the painting. I notice that I'm beginning to feel the imagery in my paintings, in my own body, sense the effect of the shapes in my sensory system. Although I'm beginning to see possible imagery in the geometric forms, my main attraction is the colour mixing. And by this point, she says, I'm no longer using earplugs or sunglasses all the time. How cool is that? So the next painting is the globular one.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Victoria's description, I sense these more plump lines are maybe an unconscious response to the stressful energy in the house at the time. An expression of shapes that feel cushioning and buffering, yet still containing and structuring and holding. And when I showed this to Victoria, showed her the writing, she wrote back, interesting to note, this was created unconsciously. I did not set out to paint shapes that would cushion me. I was just continuing to explore new possibilities for continuous line making. I notice the somatic effect afterwards. Is it my unconscious knowing what I need? Is it my inner wisdom facilitating healing steps, however big or small? And I leave that unanswered because that's far too big an issue to go into now. There's lots that I could say, and there's lots we could all say about art. So the next one, which is this, just happens to be the first of the larger format painting. Victoria says, I get some relief from this larger approach. It feels less effortful, feels voluminous and voluptuous. I like looking at it. It's like a blooming, but not a pretty delicate flower blooming, more the blooming of a woman who has been living close to the earth. The next painting, which I don't go into, is the beginning of adding straight lines. And that one is the one that follows this. So this is the one that we're looking at. It's an interesting process creating a 2D image. It is long and still and slow, staring at the image unfolding. And as it's non-representational, I find plenty of space to feel and notice and become aware of my bodily response without the extra burden of a defined subject. For me, it keeps the experience more simple and clean, clearer, less loaded, less to react to from my memory and its built-in vigilance. And the next one, which is fairly obvious when I read it, I break my continuous curved line.
Yeah, 13.
Yes. I break my continuous curved line but maintain its suggestion. I love this effect, but it was somehow difficult to compose. It took a lot of concentration. Deconstructing the continuous curved line. I like not having to make my lines so precise. I've allowed the colours to be imprecisely blended in places. Suits my body better, and with this composition it seems to work quite well. At this point I slacken off the practice of pre-numbering the compartments. My composition is created more as I paint, rather than sketched out in grey lead beforehand. So it is no longer strictly colour by numbers. I think some of the free associative words for this last painting, for me, they resonated with an interest. They were sports field, running track, pressure performance anxiety, exhilaration, fly like the wind. Wonderful. So the relationship to PTSD symptoms. Working with the core PTSD problems, the need to control everything, the need for safety, and the difficulty in trusting anyone. For Victoria, there is a loosening of the need for external control, a learning to relax and go with the flow. The larger canvas size aids her growing feeling of freedom and flow. Gaining trust in work with Paul. The relationship with Paul and his rehab therapy is giving Victoria a needed sense of safety and personal control, which is key in PTSD healing. And note the difference between the dysfunctional need for control over the external environment and the legitimate need for control over one's own internal environment. And again, Victoria responded to this by writing, yes, this has been a very significant gradual development for me, bringing to consciousness inner versus outer control and the choices I have and the consequence of both approaches. I'm slowly practicing focusing on that need to control and learning how to relinquish exhausting, unproductive external control. This runs alongside learning to value and assert my needs, being loyal and faithful to myself. So an interesting distinction. The last phase looks at the two paintings that are down on the end wall there, but they're in your book. I mean, they're on your sheet as actually the last three. But the first of those last three is actually an image from her paint palette. Sometimes I photograph my paint palette. I enjoy the beauty of these very fluid, organic, abstract artworks, seeing them only when I go to clean up. These images probably gently encourage an unconscious desire to allow more fluidity in my work. The paint palette images keep coming back into my imagination, so I start experimenting with ways to produce looser compositions. In the end, I settle for watercolours and start playing with what for me is a completely new medium. So Victoria's two layered descriptions of the next two paintings offered to me a clear example of the way art therapy can be processed in conversation with the therapist, which is usually the first thing that happens, and then usually later within the client's own mind. So her initial offering is not an interpretation of the painting, but simply a description of the process of creation and how the image looks. This describes Victoria's awareness at the time of creating the two paintings. I revert back to the continuous curved line, but allow the line to wobble and wander. The transparency of the paint feels light on the paper. It's so easy to paint with, so loose and free and imprecise. I find I tend to proceed one decision at a time based on the previous paint mark and how it formed itself. There is no required outcome, no gold standard, so I feel light and free to play and explore, though I am still held by compartments of a sort. And the next one, which is clear, it'll be the last one in the sheet.
Number 20, 23. Sorry, on your thing, number 20.
I enjoy the colorscape of this one. Compositionally, I do part continuous curved line and part in improvisation. My works are getting looser and looser, further and further away from the colour by numbers rehab brief I was given. But Paul has said at this stage I can use my gut instinct with my rehab and use my nervous system as a guide to let me know what's okay and what's too much of a stretch. We could say this description that I've just read out is more left brain, cognitive processing. The next description that Victoria penned some months later is interpretive, emotional, intuitive, or we could say right-brained. And this is it, of the first
21.
Thank you. Red, orange, yellow, earthy, embryo or seed planted in the earth, with water surrounding it to allow life, new beginnings or restructuring the foundation, trying to generate, birth, create, form new ways of being. And the next one, which is the last one on your sheet, also embryo, seed planted, also water for life. Blue, green, yellow, more watery, less earth, like a seahorse floating underwater. Primal, archaic, unfamiliar, new. I like the kinesthetics of this world. Breathing underwater, marine being. Contained, but less so. More movement, unpredictable currents. I feel a quiet confidence about navigating this environment. There may be challenges, but I will meet them one at a time. And then as a synthesis of the two-part descriptive process, I needed solid, earth-grounded security first, alone in my inner world. Then I was ready to take another baby step and explore life in a watery environment, more fluid, less predictable, more chaotic, akin to the external world. All of this was pre-conscious at the time of painting. From a neurological perspective, Victoria's interpretation of her paintings, with both her left and her right hemispheres, gives us an example of the process of integration, when thought and feeling can be integrated into a complex and complete internal experience, then changes towards health and stability can happen within the brain. I have a comment about art therapy, which I will just give to you out of interest. But also, actually, writing this was preempted by Victoria's comment, which is that viewers of artwork see the final painting and may imagine that the artist's aim was to produce this image. For non-therapeutic art making, if there is such a thing, this might or might not be the artist's aim. But artist therapy is the process of working with body, senses, brain, eyes, feeling, imagery, movement, imagination, and intention, either specific or free-floating, and only afterwards integrating the experience with language and or other modes of expression. It is first and foremost processing of experience within the self in a way that can make it visible, can bring it into consciousness or awareness, and can move the mind and body towards a state of integration, health, and being at peace with self. To achieve this, each individual must have the freedom to work with the creative process in their own way. So finally, the relationship to complex PTSD, and this is written as a kind of a conclusion. Therapy for survivors of complex PTSD, mostly childhood trauma, should include multiple therapeutic tools and strategies. Apart from traditional talking therapy and other evidence-based interventions, survivors should also be offered creative therapies, including body-based kinesthetic work, which will stimulate their right hemisphere and facilitate the process of expression and then integration of the traumatic material. I mean, obviously, from Paul's point of view, that wasn't possible at the beginning of the work with Victoria. In Victoria's case, we see the integration of the traumatic split into the duality of chaos and rigidity. Order is being restored and balance of cognitive and limbic system functions. This is from the point of view of art therapy. If you have a broken leg, the doctor or nurse puts plaster around it to hold it in place while the body does its natural healing. As biological organisms, our systems really do want to heal, but we need, with psychological, or shall we say neurobiological trauma, we need assistance, just as the broken leg does. For Victoria, and with Paul's help, it turned out that the art therapy was the plaster that held her in place long enough for her nervous system to start to recover and her mind to start healing.